I think you all have a chance to say. There we go. Joel, would you like to kick us off here? Any words?
Yeah, I don't have much to say, but happy to just welcome everyone. We're really excited about this. I mean, I think that each opportunity we're providing to you, I hope that you all are seeing how, one, it represents some of what you indicated to us you were interested in getting some support with, but it's kind of building on it. So really excited about Skills to Change Institute with us and able to delve into data interoperability and just.
Joel, your audio is a little. I'm not sure what the story is. It's a little muffled.
There's.
There you go. There you go.
You know, okay. There. I feel like I'm in a tunnel though. There's this. I don't know if somebody. I don't know. It just feels like there's a tunnel, but. Anyway, just wanted to say that we're really excited to get this started and that the technical assistance, hopefully everyone sees that it builds on each other. And then I'm just going to turn it over to you, Daniel.
Great, thanks so much. I think somebody might have muted themselves because there was that kind of that wind tunnel there. So
yeah,
just be aware of that. That would be great. And I invite you all, the non-lunch eaters, to turn your cameras on. Kind of humanizes the conversation a bit more when we see your faces. Not necessarily the chewing, but the participation would be fabulous. So feel free to do that if you've got a camera. So let me. I'm so excited to be here talking with you and sharing this work. It's been a long journey, and I want to again thank Joel and Kresge Foundation for supporting a lot of this work the last 4 years and helping us bring a lot of the pieces together that we've been working on for over 15 years. So thank you so much for this, and I'm so grateful to be able to share this broadly. I have worked with, I think, almost all of the counties in some fashion except Hennepin over the years that we've worked. So I feel like I have like relatives here in the room, if not the individuals, at least the counties that we've worked with. So let me, what I'd like to do is I'm going to just kind of talk through what the agenda is today and kind of the purpose of what we're doing, kind of what the roadmap will be and how this afternoon will work. And then I'll just give a few moments of kind of a little bit of background, how we got here. And then we'll dive into the content material. So, so we'll start with, as I said, welcome, introduction, some discussion on the purpose of this, what we hope to get out of it, and some context setting for it. And I'll share some thoughts and ideas, some kind of macro level ideas on how this material comes together. And what we're doing now, this is all very real live stuff. It's being applied in various places across the country. So it's in motion, should I say. And I think that's useful to share some of that material with you. And we'll take a quick discussion break in probably 15-20 minutes just to engage your thinking and thoughts about a couple of, well, really one question, because you know, as we've been planning for this, we really want to make sure this meets your needs. And I know everybody's doing different things and it's got different foci, but I think there's many areas of commonality, and we're hoping that both through the general sessions and the workshops, the courses itself will fill that need for you. You'll learn how to apply that or see how it applies. But then we'll also have an opportunity to do some one-on-one consulting with you and see how we can sort of fit it and address particular questions. So we'll come back and have a little bit of a debrief on that. And then we'll dive into really what I want to do is show you the foundational course overview. When you go into the course, which we'll show you and you'll have access to right after we get done with this, I find it's useful to just sort of highlight some of the key topics so that at least you've heard about them in advance. And so when they arrive, when you get to them, you'll say, oh, I heard about that. I see how it fits together. And we'll spend some time doing that. And after that, that's probably the bulk of it. We'll have some discussions, and then we'll talk about what's next and how we are going to prepare between this session and the next one in November, and what kind of group cohort work we can get started here, or what you feel like you want to do internally to your organizations. We invite conversations, questions anywhere along the way here, please feel free either in the chat or just use the emojis, raise your hand. More interactive, the better. Especially it's really for you. So if you want further clarification on something, I would be delighted to kind of dive into that, or if we need to parking lot that's also good as well. And so let me just start. As I said earlier, and here's the folks at least who responded to the meeting invite. We did have a little bit of snafu sending out the invite, so we'll double check that. So if somebody's on the call not on this list, just email or just chat, and we'll make sure we get you on there for the next session, and we know who's participating from your organizations. So as I said earlier, we've been at this work for about 15 years, and originally started in child welfare, looking at actually recruiting foster families to provide services and retain families. That was in California and then New York City. And along the way, one of the things we discovered was the lack of connectivity between all the services that families were eligible to receive or needed to receive, and how difficult it was for them to actually access that. And so that really became our journey to look at why the systems were so disconnected, and how do we connect the dots with behavioral health, education, housing, healthcare, all of the various and sundry different programs. And that really led us to this larger framework of this concept of interoperability, when that was actually a 4-letter word back several administrations ago. And really have focused on how organizations are connecting the dots, trying to connect the dots, and have been fortunate enough to be able to study that and document that, research that, and then publish that over the years. And that's been both incredibly gratifying to really work with leaders across the country, and many of them are here, between Montgomery County and San Diego, not here, Alameda, Arlington, all of you guys, Hennepin, have really in many ways at different times contributed to our knowledge base and of course the nation's understanding of this. And so we had the good fortune with significant foundation support and sponsorship support from different partners, been able to really think about these questions and be able to bring that back to the community in many ways. Say, hey, here's what people are thinking, here's how it fits together, and then sort of the next turn of the crank, and to publish that material and continue to build on those materials. And in our role as consultants to many organizations at the county and state and the federal level in the last administration, last 2 administrations actually, we've been able to codify some of the lessons learned and have brought that together in a way that we found very useful. One of the earlier things we did was with a grant from the Annie Casey Foundation, was we were able to go out and study a number of leading counties at the beginning and looked at what they were doing, and actually were able to distill from that some real common practices. And that was the foundation of some of the work you'll see here today, as their leaders were actually doing work in different parts of the country. They didn't know they were doing it. They weren't connected necessarily to one another. And we had the good fortune of being able to sort of pull some of those lessons together, and then to continue to build on that knowledge and learning, because we found obviously that there was a lot of commonality for particularly at the county level, but also at the state level, a lot of commonality in the kinds of challenges that you face, many of the people on this call face, but counties across the country face, and that everybody was starting from a blank page, basically, right? They were like, okay, we had to figure this out. We got to connect our services and supports, whether or not you were an integrated county or not. But people had to start from again, blank page. We felt like that was probably not the most productive way we could go. So maybe we could actually expedite that process. So what you're going to see here is really the aggregation of a lot of work and a lot of thinking, both in the consulting work, and then we've been bringing people together in thought leadership seminars and symposium for about 15 years, and use those opportunities to also sort of distill, learn, iterate, and then bring that material back out. So it's kind of a long history of work. And as I said, 3 or 4 years ago, with support from Kresge Foundation, we were able to really bring that together in terms of this curriculum. We've done parts and pieces of it And now what you're able to experience here is that sort of codification of that work. One thing I want to say is that from all of the assessments that I've seen and heard and participated in of what goes wrong, right, when you try to do this complicated data sharing work or the interoperability work or whatever you call it, inevitably people point to the change management aspects of the work. Almost every time they say, gosh, we didn't realize how difficult it was, and we didn't spend enough time and resources getting people on the same page, understanding that, creating a common language, a common vision. And so as a result, and defining the business problem that you're trying to solve, right? There was oftentimes earlier in history a rush to technology, a rush to sort of putting into place solutions. And what I firmly believe, and many other people have really confirmed, is if you start and you think about it and you really spend some time creating the foundation and bringing together the people who are part of this journey, that pays huge dividends over time. And that what we found was that there was really no comprehensive training program to help people think about systems change. And what we're talking about here is systems change. That was a striking, and for years we kept looking for, like, somebody's got to have a curriculum, right? I think the human services value curve and the work that APHSA did was certainly a good step in that direction. My perspective is it was a great framing of it, but it didn't give you operational tools to actually implement. So in many ways, this work, I think, sort of hand in glove, provides operational tools, knowledge, templates that you can actually move toward that generative state. For those of you who have been involved with human services value curve, I think that's a differentiator, and I think it also builds on that foundational knowledge that many people, and a great job of getting those kind of concepts out across the country. And so this work, I want you to encourage you to think about it as a systems change work, and that's not something that we as a nation oftentimes do or pay attention to. We think about sort of silos. We think about our specific ability to become more expert in specialized areas, and we remunerate people and students and professionals for how good they get at a particular thing. And what we're saying here is it really needs to be a systems perspective. You need to do the deep dive. We also need to have a systems perspective. So that's the overall sort of background that this work comes to from its long history, and it's a work in progress. So just a bit, I've spoken a lot about stewards. We've done that work under the Stewards of Change Institute, which is 501c3. And as I said, the National Interoperability Collaborative was the project that Kresge Foundation supported. And that idea was really to create a community of networks. The way we talk about that is there are both within the human services space, but in care of the healthcare, public health, education, justice spaces. There are many organizations and many associations and communities working in similar directions, but there's not been that same glue to bring them together. And so the NIC is really that effort to start to bring people together and to say, again, we don't need to recreate the wheel. What you do in justice has applications in human services, that has applications in public health, et cetera, et cetera. And so we created this forum. We've had thousands of people come to it over the last couple of years. We've held probably 75 webinars. Most of them are available. And we've reached out to all of our partners or partners in all of these different areas to bring that knowledge together. And that has been really in many ways the impetus for the work we're doing today. And I'm going to just spend a little bit of time talking about that, again, to provide the context of what we're doing now, because I think some of it will have applicability based on the assessments that each of your sites did. I guess it was about a year and a half ago. And I know they're very different in terms of what your focus and what your interests are, but I think that there's applicability here. So this pinwheel diagram off to the left here is in some ways, it's a two-dimensional picture. It really is, in many ways, it should be a three-dimensional picture, but the two-dimensional representation of the work that you probably do every day or that your organizations are attempting to bring together. If you put the person, student, patient, client, customer in the middle, and you say somebody is multi-system involved, multi-generational involved, this just sort of represents the complexity of the various moving parts and pieces that we're having to deal with. These different domains in the blue section, I call those domains, whether that's health, judicial, education, obviously funnel down to the actual state or local systems that are delivering the services. A couple of the counties fit there, and then there's the specific programs that need to reach out. How this gets integrated, how data gets shared between these various organizations is the $64 billion question, right? In terms of how you do this. And so I'm going to show you, and you'll see here a number of sort of visual models that are helpful. I think this one is particularly intuitive in terms of what we're trying to do. But sometimes that picture is worth 1,000 words is really helpful. And I found over the years, sometimes just showing it it moves the conversation along more quickly, especially to legislators or to other folks, funders, or to other people in your organization or customers or even taxpayers whose work you're doing on their behalf. It really represent them. So just for a minute here, we're involved with 4 things here. One is Project Unify. So this picture actually came out of Project Unify. Project Unify grew out of the National Interoperability Collaborative. As I said, we've been meeting for a couple of years, and people who have been involved, there's a core group of about anywhere from 25 to 50 people over the last couple of years who have come together to say, let's do something about this. Let's figure out if we can create models that jurisdictions could use. So we're not building the software, the technology. We're building an implementation guide or a roadmap, technical specifications and models that jurisdictions don't have to start from scratch, right? So what's an authentication model? What's an identity management? What's security? How do you deal with consent? How do you deal with the actual technology? How do you deal with all those things? And right now, everybody has to sort of figure that out by themselves. So part of our work is within Project Unify is to do that, so it becomes kind of an open source knowledge bank to be able to build on that and to be able to contribute to that. And so there's been a lot of people involved with that. And one of the things that has really come out of that, and it's the 4th bullet point here, is this consent model. I'll talk about the other 2 things just briefly, but out of Project Unify and the work we've done in the last 6 to 8 months, one of the things that really has percolated up to the top of the list here is the challenges that everybody faces around getting informed consent, whether or not it's healthcare, behavioral health, 42 CFR, FERPA, state codes.
Got in there.
A little bit of.
I just wanted to make sure. I was looking for it.
You got a little bit of back. Yeah, thanks for muting. So this consent work, which is the current focus of our efforts right now, both on a local and a national basis, is to create a utility that would allow people, persons, patients, clients, actually provide their consent in a uniform way, and that could be adapted all across the country. So it's an open source model. Our perspective is if we can address consent, then many of the data sharing issues become less onerous. They don't go away, but they become much more manageable because now you've gotten consent. And as opposed to asking every community and every sector to build that out themselves, we're trying to provide this, as I said, this utility model. I suspect that all of you or many of you are addressing consent somewhere in your efforts to share data. And I think I've come to the perspective that without some kind of sort of engine, some kind of utility that does this, we're not going to really make all that much progress in a short period of time with data sharing. This is the proverbial elephant in the room. And so I can talk more about that later. I just wanted to put this out there to say there are real applications, and ITCC actually enables a lot of them for reasons you'll see. And the second bullet point, integrated care for kids, probably many of you have heard of this as well. It's a federally funded 8-site, 7-year. Really, it's an effort to connect the dots between Medicaid, healthcare, child welfare, education, behavioral health, and justice. So they're funded to do this work in 8 sites across the country. We're working with New York and the Bronx and in New Jersey to actually implement the consent model and some other places there to actually use it as proof of concept. So those are actually implementation sites that you can learn from, you can join, they can learn from you as well, because they're actually, and the best part about that is they've got a 7-year window, right? Or now 6-year window of time. So the fact that there's an implementation site going that you can learn from and join would be beneficial. And again, as I'm thinking about what we can provide to you, what kind of resources, yes, there's a technical training, which we're going to dive into shortly here, but the context in which this lives is really important because you're part of a larger ecosystem. And I think there's a lot of people and a lot of organizations out there that have a lot of knowledge that can both, again, learn from you, but also that you can participate in. And all those doors are open to you. And we can explain that as we go forward over the next couple of months. The last point, the National Action Agenda, I won't say much about that. It's just we brought people together during COVID to think about these very problems from all across the country. And it was an amazing experience for about 8 months. And what came out of that was actually this consent service utility as the thing we could do as a community to make a substantive structural change in the safety net across the country. And it has actually materialized. We've been seriously focused on that the last 6 months. So I'm optimistic that change is possible, that there's a national community of people doing this work, and you know, it appears as though there's sufficient funding, hopefully coming from the federal and local levels, to be able to fund this stuff in a way that needs to get done. So I want to just offer that up again as some introductory comments there. If there's any question, comments, would be a good time to just raise your hand or jump in. If anybody has a thought. Okay, so this is the interactive session now here. I gave you just a little bit of a taste for some of these ideas. What I'd like to do, we're just going to spend 10 minutes. And this is, I know for myself, we're sitting in presentations, it's really good to get my voice out. It's good to be able to sort of articulate what you're hearing, what you're thinking, what you're feeling a little bit to engage, with the content we're going to get into here. So you can read the question. Gillian, do we have that in the chat? Put it into Google Doc. There it is.
I just put it there.
Fantastic. So what we're going to do is we're just going to break you into, I think we have like 20 people or 27. We're going to break into 4 groups, randomly assign you to those groups. Gillian, myself, and Adam will join you, and Uma as well. We'll just, and I guess you guys will be assigned as well. But just have the conversation. It's kind of a open-ended sort of brainstorming. We're not asking for, we don't have to take notes on it at all. We may have a little debrief afterwards, but just to get your brain thinking about this question, right? About as you're moving towards this equity-centered whole person care, what's the most pressing challenge you're facing? What to really make this work, this happen, right, in your community? Everybody clear on the question? If you click on it in the chat, I'll have it. You can have it open in your browser, or we can just send it to everybody as well. Everybody got that?
How much time for this breakout, Daniel?
Just going to spend 10 minutes. We're just going to spend 10 minutes. So, it's not a long thing. So just hopefully everybody in the group can say, just a few thoughts. So we'll get everybody's voice into the conversation. We'll call you back in about 10, 12 minutes or so. And so what I'm going to do, I think I'm just going to break.
Oh, I have it set up.
Okay, you're going to break it into just random groups?
Yep.
Okay.
Are you
So
ready?
we'll be back then and have at it. We'll be joining and talking with you as well. Looks like Jessica's still here. Is Jessica still here?
Yeah, she's assigned to room 3. I think she's frozen.
Yeah. So do you want to go to, where's Adam? Did we send Adam somewhere?
Yes, Adam is, he might have, it looks like he left. He was assigned a room, but he left.
Okay, great. So do you want to join room 3 and I'll join room 4?
Sure. And you don't want them to write anything down, right?
No, they don't need to write anything down.
Okay.
Just just give us, just take take some time to talk about it a little bit. See what they think here. Oh, good. I think she must. There she is. Jessica joined. So we can give like a 2-minute warning. I think 10 minutes is fine for people to.
Yeah.
I wonder if we should even join it or stay out of it.
The question's too long. So I'm just
What?
gonna let them know. I was gonna post the question in a broadcast message, but I'll just let them know we'll close the rooms at 12. We want to pause the recording, correct?
It's great. Got it. Thanks very much. Oops. Let me put this up here. So we launched this sort of officially at the beginning of 2021. And as I said, just briefly, it's really a systems level approach. What we're trying to bring to the table here is systems and systems of systems. We'll talk more about that to bridge silos and address challenges of multi-domain information sharing. I think that's really maybe the differentiating characteristic here is we're trying to think about the way systems are organized and the way they can be sort of redesigned or reorganized to be able to accomplish much of what everybody was just talking about is you've got these silos and all sorts of barriers for being able to share that information. That's not new, but the approach from a systems perspective, I think adds a layer to help people. And I think it was, I'm not sure who said it exactly before, but I'm the best eligibility worker, I'm the best caseworker. Yeah, that's what I do. How they see themselves in relationship to the organization and the programs is what's important. So that's one main thing. Another important part about this training, I think, is it provides a common vocabulary, a language, knowledge, tools, templates to not only do planning, strategic action planning. This is very applicable and useful for that, but it's also helpful for building and sustaining change through an organization. And sustaining change is really an important part because there is always, although there's a lot of tenured folks on this call, been around for a while, many places are fraught with that sort of revolving door, political change, at the governor level, senior people leave, new curriculum, not a new curriculum, but a new approach happens. Firmly believe that creating sustainability through that language, through that common understanding of how we're approaching the work has huge long-term benefits. And this work, as we all know, takes for a long time to accomplish the work. So that kind of sustainability, and that happens, I think, in many ways when people understand the complexity, their role in that complexity, but how that fits together. And the other part of this is we have envisioned a certification program, and we're developing the modules to support kind of adaptive learning, given that we're in the midst of the sort of crazy times here, especially with COVID. Who knows how long that will last. But the idea of a certification program is important because I know organizations have tried for a long time to sort of identify interoperability sort of people who can do that work. California had that for a while. There was an individual whose job was to sort of cut across. He got one person in HHS, and of course he got sucked into a million programs. I've talked to numerous leaders, and I've asked them, how did you build your organization in a way that that would really sort of meet your vision, and the response was brick by brick, right? So I had to find people, I had to bring them in, I had to train them. Hopefully they would be good trainers, they'd be able to sort of propagate that through the organization. And so many organizations have done that, and that's a long process. It takes quite a while to do that. So the idea is, if you could present a curriculum that provided competency-based learning in a range of different areas, then you can almost certify somebody that has a basic knowledge, a systems knowledge, right? They know about the technical, they know about the legal, they know about workforce, they know about equity, they know about X, Y, Z. We'll get into some of those pieces. Then you're actually potentially hiring for somebody who could actually do that. Or you're infusing your RFPs with that kind of knowledge. Much the same way on the technology side, a PMP, a product management professional. You can't do work in many places without a PMP on your team. So the same way the concept is, and this is a bigger idea, is can you actually create a certification program and encourage people to create those skills and then continue to develop those, so you have a cadre of folks who actually understand that systems change. So it's not dependent on the leader every time trying to find that person, but you can expedite that process. So those are some of the core ideas behind the work here. And you'll notice at the top this other complicated word called interoperability, and that actually kind of evolved years ago as we were thinking about the complexity of this work and how do you do this work. And one of the things that really sort of jumped out was after you actually connect the boxes and wires, right? After you do that, and I think that's my next slide actually. After you do that, what do you do next, right? Because in many ways, interoperability is how do you get the systems to exchange data, all the technical stuff, legal stuff, all those components of it. But in so many other categories outside of human services and outside of healthcare services, most people spend most of their time collecting data. It's like 90% of the time collecting the data, warehousing it, cleaning it, maybe 10% of the time actually using it to make change. I don't know, if you disagree with that, please raise your hand or shout loudly now. It's astounding to me, having worked in corporate America. I worked in a very large food company for a decade. And we would spend all of our time gathering data. Now, sort of pre-computer almost, I admit to that. But, and then you'd say, okay, we've got 5 minutes, let's figure out what the data means. And I suspect that that is true everywhere still, right? We're so busy collecting and warehousing and cleaning it. And then we're the data scientists, right? How many of you have actually, sort of PhD or master's level data analytics scientists on staff? A couple people? Okay, a couple folks do. We create these data warehouses that you need a master's or PhD level to actually write the queries and do it, because it's still relational databases that are not friendly to natural language process, sort of querying or searchable databases. So our systems, even today, are very complicated, and they don't necessarily give us the plug and play, like, okay, tell me about this family. What are they involved with? I know folks in California, I know, having worked with Mike Wilkening and an agency for a bunch of years, they spent years trying to just say, okay, who else, what other agencies is this family involved with? And it took them Herculean tasks just to find out if they're getting, SNAP, TANF, and Medicaid. So the idea of interoperability is to integrate and to optimize. It's what do you do after you've connected the site, the data? And we got to keep that in mind. It's hard, it hurts my head to think about that, but we can't stop once we get the systems. We haven't reached the goal once we've connected our systems. We need to be able to help ourselves and our staff understand, what do you do with that information? How do you become data literate? That's a question that we've asked, and oftentimes have done a bunch of courses around that. Just data literacy. Who knows what a histogram is? What's a normal distribution graph? What's the appropriate end for a statistical study? Some fundamental statistical models that we need to be able to understand and apply to the data to make sure we're not reacting to outliers. And so there's a whole component of creating the literacy we need in order to be able to use the data, so that once we have a view, we can really make sense of it, and we can make sure that we're interpreting it appropriately. So that's really the 50,000 foot idea. Is like, can we strive to not only collect and use the data, but also be able to make sense of it as we go forward? And I think that, I know from my experience, that resonates a lot with people. And that's the fundamentals of actually doing the work. Ultimately, you want to do the work of coordinating care for families. But if you don't have the data, et cetera, it goes from there. Okay. Again, if you have questions, jump in, raise your hand. If you want to make a comment, amends are fine as well. Whatever engaging in this work here, it's helpful for us to know. So the course, one too far. So, so the course that you're going to have the opportunity to take after we finish here is split into 3 parts. There's essentially 3 modules in it. The first module is Introduction to Interoperability. It really talks about, it's a fairly short module, but it talks about actually interoperability. It talks about some of the basic concepts. How do you think about it? What the components of it are. It uses, we rely some on the HIMSS definition, the Health Management Information Systems, who've done a lot of work around interoperability. And it's just trying to set the, sort of set the table, so to speak, so we all kind of have an understanding of interoperability, at least to begin with. That's the first module. As I said, there's 3 modules. There's probably, that one's probably 20, 25 minutes. The next module is we probably had 75, 80 people go through the course already. So it looks like it's about an hour and 15 minutes sort of screen time for the second one, and about the same for the third module. So there's about maybe 3 hours of screen time going through that. Includes an assessment in each of the module 1 and module 2. There's now also there's sort of recommended reading, there's optional reading, there's workbook activities, there's a glossary, there's a lot of stuff in the actual module itself, which is all self-paced. You can go in, you can stop, you can come back. It's pretty interactive. There's videos, there's sort of drop-down choices. It should be interesting in terms of taking the course as well, and you can pace it accordingly. So the first module is this interoperability concept. The second one is the conceptual framework here. And again, this module, this foundational course is really trying to set the sort of the big picture here. The third module in this gets a little more to the brass tacks. So here, when we're thinking about system redesign, we have 3 pillars here. One is social determinants, which everybody is familiar with, but it kind of does a recap of that to make sure that we're all talking about the same things. We're talking about how do we think about social determinants now? And in fact, we're looking at creating another sort of add-on module around ACEs, in part driven by California's ACEs Aware program, and trying to include that as another module that would be beneficial to really kind of going deeper into the SDOH kind of work. The second area, and I'll just show you the pictures of it. So we have the SDOH piece, which we're all familiar with. So that's probably a fairly easy one. This other one, which we call our 6 domains. And this is some work we did for, as I said, HIMSS. And for those of you who don't know HIMSS, HIMSS is the Healthcare IT Association, National Global Association. It's unbelievable. I've gone to several of their conferences. They have 50,000 people at their conferences, literally 50,000 people. Talk about the scale of healthcare and healthcare IT. They only can do it in Orange County and Las Vegas. This year, they only had 15,000 on site. I didn't go to it, but they generate a lot of industry knowledge and information. They are themselves, as a healthcare organization, and I mention this because they're the dominant association in the healthcare space, and they drive so much of what ends up in social services and in behavioral health, just because of the magnitude of healthcare and how much energy and how much state budgets and county budgets are spent on healthcare. We have to pay attention to them, and we need to help them understand the social and human services space. They were beginning to get interested in social care, and so they asked us to kind of look at it from a multi-system perspective. So we looked at these different areas: public health, education, public safety, to try to identify what was common between them. Because if we it's big enough just to think about, child welfare, or think about healthcare, or think about behavioral health. But when you move into education, right, that's its own universe, and they breathe different oxygen, right? They have a whole different world of that they're operating under. Same thing for public safety, right? Different universe, justice, different world, emergency medical. And yet there are so many commonalities, the same clients we're dealing with, right? So how do we identify James Johnson Jr. from Solano in 3 or 4 of these, because you just had an earthquake hit, right? And now there's emergency care, there's public health, maybe, all those different things. And yet we still segment our thinking into, well, we're a human services program, when in fact we have commonalities across all these. So this document that's available as a resource lays that out at a fairly high level. So what are the commonalities between these systems? How do we just think about it? Not that we need to become experts in it, but if we get a feed of information from education or public safety, do we even know what to do with it? What does the data mean to us? We're not a cop, right? We're not a probation officer. They have a whole different language. So we need to be aware of that. Again, you can go down different levels of expertise, but as we're thinking about designing systems, that's an important consideration. So we touch on that, right? Again, these are the sort of the introductory courses, just to again expand your frame of reference of what and how we're thinking about interoperability or interoperability. The last major pillar here is this idea of system of systems engineering. And this was really driven home when we were doing our symposia the last 6 years or so with Johns Hopkins at Bloomberg and with the Applied Physics Lab. And we did some work for the Administration for Children and Families, creating an architecture. Some of you may have heard of the National Human Services Interoperability Architecture, or NISIA. It was looking at trying to build off of the Medicaid architecture and provide an architecture for states and counties to build off of. So we had a common national architecture. That's a whole different conversation, but it's a useful thing to remember, because there is, for those of you interested in architecture or your organizations thinking about it, it really laid it out. It's not the most current technology, but it does have a framework that is super important, especially if we're trying to think about how do we connect to Medicaid, and Medicaid not only for information, but also for funding. And there's lots of opportunities for Medicaid to be funding some of these programs, because it helps Medicaid. If we get people healthier and who are receiving Medicaid, that helps the Medicaid program. They can pay for 90% of the build, 90% of the build, and some of the 75% of the maintenance and operation, which is something I keep rattling the cages, even just a little tangent, but it's useful for I know counties are in a different position, but that's changing as well. Even in the last Medicaid director's letter of last January, they reiterate that this 90-10 is still applicable and are calling people to say, come get the money. So working with your state partners, that is a sustainable model that may help many states actually do this work as opposed to one-time funding. Anyway, that's an aside there. What I wanted to say is, in our work with Hopkins, there was a couple of professors from the Applied Physics Lab who really were engineers, and as we worked with them and as we sort of presented in our symposia, this whole idea of system of systems engineering came out, and it is exactly what we need in our field here. The way they describe it, and you'll see it, there's actually a wonderful, entertaining video in the training. Don't miss it. It's really fun. You can show it to anybody. I'm not going to tell you anything about it, but it demonstrates systems of systems engineering, PhD stuff at the most fundamental level. You're gonna love it. But it's great. You have to pay attention to it because there's a quiz afterwards. But the basic concept is the way they think about it, because these literally were the rocket scientists. You go into their offices at APL, and they got Trident submarine, they got the cruise missiles on the big, we have kids and families, they got cruise missiles as you walk in. And it's a little disconcerting, but the thinking is, look, you've got Army, Navy, and Air Force. They all have different systems. They're all gigantic systems that actually need to interoperate in order to do their mission, whether or not, whatever. We don't need to get into the politics of that, but they need to interoperate, because they've got satellites, they've got people on the ground, they've got ships, they got planes. They get it wrong in a big way. So this idea of systems engineering comes from the fact that it says you leave your systems in place. You don't think about sort of integrating your systems, because that doesn't work very well. But you build over that. You build sort of over that to say, what information can we draw from those systems with the right protections so that we can get the information we need, and let each of the systems optimize their own approach. So we're drawing the information, delivering it to the authorized user at the end of the day. Carrie Miller, who is, some of you may know her from California, heard that at one of our, she was at this presentation and changed the entire way she was thinking about the work in LA County from a systems perspective. Because everybody keeps saying, how do we integrate? How do we integrate? How do we integrate our systems? And that's, in my opinion, that's a no-win situation. You don't have the funding to do it. The technology and the procurement is so slow that by the time you get done building it, the next generation of technology. So that's a whole area we can get into as we kind of get into deeper dive in this conversation. So we go into systems. You don't need to have an engineering degree. Don't get worried about that. It just lays out some of the concepts of that from a meta perspective, which is super helpful for some people when you're trying to share the concept of how do we make all these systems work together. We're not creating it. It's being used in other areas now. We just need to appropriate it or use it in our ways of thinking about system design in a way that really reflects the multi-systems that we have to deal with. Okay, I get really excited about that because I think it's conceptually, it blows people up sometimes when they think about a different way of approaching this challenge. And because of the way systems are being designed and architected now, it makes it more available. It makes it more possible that you design your system to meet its particular needs. Everybody knows the word API, I'm sure, or right. So you just design it so you can export the data in a way, using a common standard that somebody else can consume. So you do what you need to do the way you need to do it. Just make sure you're using the standard or adhering to the kind of standards that are out there that other people can absorb and use that information. There's a new way of that's coming on board now that's going to be very helpful to us, is the next generation of that. Let me pause for a second there. Do I have any amens? Do I have any reflections? Is anybody thinking systems in their organization now? Anybody sort of trying to apply those methodologies?
Hey, this is James. I guess just a comment or thought. I think what you're talking about and really trying to understand the information from like a high level meta kind of level. I guess one of the things I think we're like we've had conversations about is like how much of it, for example, like use API, right? Like, and everybody may not understand what an API is, but most people understand that like we have data in some system and we need to change it to some language to get it to like another system. I think sometimes where I see our conversations us hit like barriers is we go down this rabbit hole of like, where does the theory of like API come from? And who like, where are like the white papers that talk about like what an API is and like what data standards, and I'm just wondering, like, I think some of my pushback has been, we don't always have to go, like, you don't have to understand like all the nuts and bolts on how it was built. Like somebody needs to understand that, right? But everybody doesn't necessarily need to understand it. We want everybody to understand like the high level, and then others come in and fill in like in the places, like maybe one person does the export, somebody else does the transformation of data, somebody else loads the data, somebody else ingests it on the other end. And I've just been trying to like, I think, balance like how much is like just understand like the high level and kind of understand where we're going versus because we get stopped. I think we get stopped in when we get into the weeds of how exactly does this thing work, and let's spend like a few weeks like getting deeper into like the weeds of it, and I think that slows us down and then doesn't allow us to move forward sometimes.
Yes, I hear what you're saying. A couple of responses to that. One is it's like you go over to the light switch and flip the switch on, right? The light's going to come on. You don't need to know the thermonuclear, sort of that is happening in the background or what's happening there. At that point, we need to bring the technologists in and require systems to be able to deliver basically, basically a message that says, I can read that, right? We're going to use English to deliver the mail, right? And so when I pick that letter up, I know it's going to be written, or I'm going to be able to translate it to my language. So we can go into some of those details. And part of the NIC is a bunch of developers and programmers and people who are very deep into these conversations. We can structure those conversations. We can have those conversations if that's helpful to your organization. And you can join those groups. There's working groups that are happening that are available as well. Plus, there's a lot of already pre-recorded videos. there's a lot of resources we can point you towards that might be helpful for either yourself or others, and or we can, you know, as I said, when we're going to sort of talk individually with each county, what can we sort of focus, what would be helpful to you guys? And that may be, if I'm answering your question or responding to your thought, that's kind of considered. Again, not everybody's in the same place. Some are ahead, some behind maybe, but those things are potentially on the table. Rich.
Right. So I think one of the, and this is just a thought, one of the challenges I know that bubbles up is that we sometimes have the interface conversation too late in the game, right?
Yeah.
So we've worked on 2 systems and they're further along and they're in adaptability mode on the user side. And now we talk about, oh, let's see if they can speak to each other. And the initial conversations, even when you were purchasing these systems, did not have that API conversation. And that's very, very important because there's a lot of lessons learned on things where we're now having to use a third medium to interface data. And that's always awkward and not sustainable. But I think that sometimes is our challenge, is that it's hard to make that decision upfront, right? So if you're getting a product, the product can meet your needs 80% of the time. And that 20% is that interface or that interoperability. You're now making that call. What am I living with? What can I live with, right? Do I need to have a different system to meet that 20% and then have these 2, right? But I don't know if we make those decisions transparently upfront, right? I feel like we accept it sometimes, and then when it comes to, oh, we really need this, then we start talking about it. But I think it's important that we start talking about these issues up front. Even if you're going to accept the 80%, you can accept your 20% risk, right? And know what that's going to be down the line. My 2 cents.
This is Cheryl from Solano County. I also think right from the get-go, we need to have the right people at the table, because I find many times we get invited to the table after decisions have been made. And I think you need legal, you need risk, you need compliance, you need more than just a few folks at the table when decisions are being made, and they need to be at the table at the beginning so everybody has a good understanding of the direction we're going and what we're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. And so the next couple of slides are really geared toward that, Cheryl. And how do you and how does the organization sort of create that ethos that we have to have the right people at the table? Sometimes the right people aren't at the right table because they don't see what their role is, right? I'm the, bring the attorneys in at the end of the day, as opposed to at the first meeting, and figure out what that is. I mean, hold that thought a bit, but I completely agree, because people don't see how they're actually affecting the process, because they don't see the whole process. They just see they're part of the process sometimes. And so having that comprehensive view, which I'll show you, and again, in some of the user design and the graphics work and the personas and scenarios we use will help that happen, I think, in some ways. But to Rishon's point as well, we can, while human services in particular doesn't have many standards, if any, there's a few, common standards, authorized standards out there. Whereas if you go to the healthcare side of the world, and we can get into the details on that, man, there's a lot. HL7, fire, man, that is on fire. The Office National Coordinator is spending big money on that, and making sure that when you send for those of you know that, there's standards in healthcare that are really developing. Probably heard of Gravity Project, which is trying to standardize codes for social determinants so they can be used for billing and transfer and all that stuff. All good. There's a lot of watch outs on that. I sit on the executive committee for the Gravity Project as well. So I'm the squeaky wheel that says, yes, that's great. Healthcare needs that information, but the world is not all about an EHR. That information has to flow the other direction, right? It needs to get into the school. That's it. Brains blow up there. So what we're trying to advocate for, and this again is part of having, technology language is as frightening to people and for me, for, as legal languages for folks, right? You don't want to say anything because you're not, one, you don't want to look stupid. Second of all, you don't necessarily have the whole picture. But a basic competency around knowing what questions to ask so that your subject matter experts are at the table saying, so what standards are we? Why are we using an HL7V2, right? Or why are we going to fire, right? Or are we using the NEAM standard? Guess what? Education has all these common education data standards. Why are we creating something that doesn't have the ability to share that information with us? That kind of basic competency is, again, what I think is really important for human services organizations to be able to build that knowledge. So when you're at the table, because the technology, people just relegate the technology decisions because it's out of your comfort zone. So again, becoming more comfortable with the language of the ideas, learning where you can learn more of that makes you a better consumer of those, or at least a facilitator of those kind of conversations internally. Let me push on a little bit here, but feel free, again, raise questions. Those are great questions. And I think that the more those things are top of mind, we can also sort of think about as this, as this training goes forward, how do we take some deeper dives into some of the stuff, right? Or other places where this really resonates with you, there are people and resources and groups now working that you can get real smart on it real quick and join those conversations and bring that back to your organization. So one of the things we did on the training is we built in these workbook activities. So in the actual training itself, there's a little button that says, or there's actually a question that says, now go to the workbook and sort of reflect on this idea, right? So there's some people have found that very useful for taking notes as well. Like just you read a concept. I know for me, I got to say it to somebody or I got to write it down in order to capture it. There's a lot of concepts here. So these reflections are, I think there's 5 or 6 in the first section and another 5 or 6 in the next section. It's good for you just to see if you get it. Some of these things are obvious. Some of them are a little more complicated. But where this becomes very useful for you as a county or as a cohort, because this gives you the opportunity to have the conversation internally, right? Offline or asynchronously. You can take the course whenever you want it to take it. But then as you're reflecting on the questions, this would be sort of the I use the word homework, for want of a better word, to say, how do you get together internally and have the conversation? So when we get back together or we meet independently, you've now had the conversation around some of these concepts. You're starting to activate the language and starting to use it in your own way, if it's, again, it's helpful to you. So this question here, I put this one up particularly because I think there's 6 questions in the first module. This is one of the ones that we're suggesting that you, between now and the next meeting, that you actually think about this. And we've had a lot of this conversation already here today, and then have a conversation with your group, with your cohort, see if there's a consensus around it. 1, just to exercise the process. 2 is to see, well, what would this mean for us, right? What would this actually mean? And seeing if we can just describe that. So that's there. You'll see that in the training as we go forward. Okay, this is the this is not the second module. This is, well, there's introduction and then there's module 1 and module 2. Don't get confused by it. There's 3 parts of the training. This is the 3rd part of it. This is the actual tools and templates, right? And some concepts. And let me kind of go through this quickly. Again, you're going to see this. I just wanted to share it with you again up front. I don't need to get into great detail. This is at a macro level from a language perspective. And Uma was very helpful with this. Actually, we kind of identified this with Montgomery County years ago when we were having these conversations. And all of a sudden, sort of the elephant in the room was, hey, I'm talking about policy, and you're talking about how does this work in practice? And all of a sudden, it became pretty clear that where you sit defines what you see, right? So if you're in the policy seat, you're going to view the world through a policy lens. If you're in a structure or infrastructure view, you're going to see how we're going to connect the boxes, how we're going to do this stuff in a practice world. Or if you're, there should be actually a 4th category in here, which is kind of workforce and equity. How do we view the world through that viewpoint? And we haven't updated that to say that, but just even defining where are we talking, what are we talking about? Is this a policy issue? Is it a structural issue? Is it all of those things together? Simply defining the terms of the conversation can sometimes remove some of the confusion that we all sit through in meetings saying, well, what was that about? You know, what, I don't understand where we're at. Defining that. And so this little model here helps us say, okay, what are we talking about? All these things, and there's obviously overlap between them. Are we talking about an outcomes-driven activity? Like, do we need to know that we're going to increase, you know, by 3%, 5%, 20%? Or are we moving more towards innovation, which may not be so quantifiable? We don't know on innovation what the outcome is going to be, right? So defining how we're going at a particular problem or addressing a particular opportunity. We open to change, we open to innovation, or we got to get the outcomes. We need the deliverables. We only have, you know, that's the nature of the grant, or that's the nature of the program. And is that change evolutionary, you know, incremental? We're going to make 5% this year, next year, the ongoing year, or we got to blow the thing up. We got to do it. We got to, you know, COVID was revolutionary, right? We got to figure out how to do remote, you know, interactions with children and families. Overnight, courts changed, right? Never thought the courts would change. That was a revolutionary change. What is it, the implications of that? So, you know, it's kind of that high level model. I'm going to go through some of these kind of quickly. Big believer in user-centered design and graphics and illustration. If you've seen any of our work, you'll know that we do a lot with graphics, because at least half the world are visual learners. And I bet if I did a polling here, probably half would say, yeah, pictures are really important for me. And so because these concepts are so complicated, we need to complement them with images so people can understand them. Nobody has time to really read the 50-page document, right? So if we can convey it, this is something we created for Department of Social Services under Rod Bremby in Connecticut a couple of years ago. They were creating an integrated services unit within their department, within the agency, and it was part of their Medicaid evaluation program. So we created this family, the Benson family. You can read some of the details of it. This is just the graphical illustration of it. There's a whole case study that goes along with a couple pages defining the situation. There's something in this for everybody that was at the table, right? So you got dad who's out of, you know, kind of kicked out of the house, is unemployed, living at grandma's house, not the best situation. Some are available for child support payments. All of those pieces are there. So anybody who's at the conversation, if we want to have a conversation about who the customer is, who the client is, they're represented here in this particular picture, right? This is not everybody. And you can actually say, well, what percentage of our families look like this, right? What percentage of our families look differently than this? And the exercise here is, you can see, is what do we need to know from our clients? You know, we have data in our systems, but we don't know if they've got a religious affiliation, if they got a strong community support. We don't know if they've got, well, we don't know a lot about well, what would we need to know in order to be able to serve them better? And then what do we need? What do we know from our systems? What do we think we know from our systems? So this is just one illustration of how do you communicate the complexity of what we're dealing with, or what we're trying to coordinate services for, okay? And I don't know if you'll see them in the, you won't see the Bensons in the training, but you will see, this is an earlier version. You have different ways of sort of portraying this. You have this family, small family, mom, daughter's got a child's pregnant again, more of a child welfare case. And they're interacting with 5 different systems, and they all have a whole bunch of different medical needs. So you're going to meet the Garcias. There's a little animation in the training that sort of asks you to think about the complexity. Again, this is nothing new to you folks, but it's amazing how powerful this is for showing this to your fiscal people, or showing this to a legislative person, or so. This is just one family out of 1 million that you serve. Multiply this by 1 million times, right? It gets very complicated, but it's very powerful in terms of sharing that. And there's other ones that I'll show you later on that are all available to you. So we have a bunch of these different personas: child welfare personas, adult aging personas, immigrant, personas, vet. And they're all accessible for helping communicate and share that, and or do the kinds of deep dive thinking and planning within your organization that can be very helpful. So we introduced those thoughts, that concept, and the Garcia family as a way to think about that. Now, this next slide, I think I have like 3 or 4 slides left. So I just want to share that because I know it's a lot of material here, but that's why I wanted to show it to you. This work, I mentioned, if you remember, at the start of this presentation, I said I had the great opportunity to go out to a number of different counties. So we went out to Allegheny County, we went out to Montgomery County, we went out to San Diego and Alameda and Mecklenburg, and talk with the leadership there to say, what is it that you're doing? Why are you successful? Why are you making progress? And all of them, in one way or another, identified these change drivers as what was on their dashboard, right? So Mark Turner, or Nick or Uma or other folks were able to say, you know what, I'm paying attention to all these things. It's super hard to do that, or 7 of them or 6 of them or 8 of them. But we were able to, almost like an archaeologist, we were able to say, okay, you know what, these are maybe not everything, but certainly 10 categories of leadership focus that's really critical to doing interoperability work. You can't really do it without really understanding where you are individually and as an organization against these things. So over the years, we've had the opportunity to really kind of dive into these change drivers, and sort of mastering these or understanding these becomes part of that whole certification program, right? So what do I know about leadership and governance? What do I know about any of these other particular drivers? And we're creating the curriculum to reflect that sort of fundamental knowledge and then a more in-depth knowledge as you go forward. And it doesn't matter what door you come in, right? So that's the idea of that image in the middle here, which says, yeah, I'm going to come in through a child welfare door, but I got to deal with all these things anyways if I come in through a SNAP door, because everybody's needing more and multiple kinds of services. So behind each of these drivers is a rubric. This is the customer rubric. And so this allows you, you can look at this, slide and say, yeah, we're pretty good on leadership. You know, everybody loves their leader and we're productive. We're getting our budgets met. And so we're good on leadership. Or we're good on we know our customers, right? We've talked to 10 of them this year. This actually begins to articulate using a rubric approach. So where are we, right? If you're talking about generative, regulatory, whatever, this now begins to try to articulate specifically, where do you put yourself? The 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. So what you do with this, as you think, and you can do this sort of qualitatively as a leadership group or as an organization, say, okay, let's look at each of these drivers. Where do you think you are? James, where do you think you are on the customer? Well, I think we're, pretty good. We got a good sense of it. And Jessica says, I don't know anything about our customer. All I know is that they're consuming $1 billion worth of county resources. That's it. What are we getting from that? So it comes together here. And this is probably, of all the things we've created, probably one of the more useful, intuitive tools. And it probably resonates with you right away. So you think about each of those 10 drivers, do an assessment of it, saying how important is it to our organizational mission and vision, right? Critical, super important, very important, somewhat important. And where are we at on the maturity matrix? So you can basically do pin the tail on donkey. Obviously, you want to be in the upper right quadrant. You want, important things having mastery or proficiency around it. But this allows you to, and this will be maybe one of the things we're suggesting, not the next session, but after that, is to actually do an assessment internally with your team, just to try it out. You do it individually and say, okay, where are we at on technology? Well, super critical, and we stink at it, right? Or we're pretty sophisticated. We've invested a lot. You place that, and then you have the conversation internally, see if the assumptions line up. Inevitably, some do, but many don't. There's many outliers here. So now this becomes, again, another tool for bringing other people into the conversation, right? How are we doing on the financial part? How are we doing on workforce? How are we doing on technology? So you can do it qualitatively, or you can do it quantitatively. And so we've developed a 150 question survey and have gone through that with multiple jurisdictions to actually get a number that says, hey, you know what, we're at 2.5. We're going to come back in 2 years and see if we move the dial. We're going to go invest X amount of money in programs or services solutions. Have we actually done better? So it's a way to create a baseline. I'm a big believer in actually seeing if you can create a baseline, because then you'll know, potentially have at least a sense of, either again, qualitatively or quantitatively, whether or not we move the dial. So this is what I think is one of the more useful starting places. and you may have already just done this, right? If you've done strategic planning and you got a sense of it, but I offer it as a way to get everybody on the same page, especially in the leadership group, to say, where are we? Where are we strong? Where do we need to invest our resources? Where do we need to build the organization? And have a consensus around that, as opposed to a set of assumptions. Make sense? And then there's some workbook reflections on this next. This is the third module of that. And this one is particular. Like, you know, do we have a full sense of who are we serving? Do we really know who they're serving? Do we know their wants, needs, fears, and goals? Yeah, maybe some people, some we don't. So there. This is again a series of reflections in the workbook that's online as well. And then there's generally when people take the course, we actually provide a certification of actually having done the course, and this is on the way to the actual overall certification. Okay. I've yammered on quite a bit here, but what I wanted to do, as I said now a couple times, I wanted to at least share with you the concepts you're going to see in the training, so that they just don't like, oh, what are all these different things here? Hopefully, this is somewhat helpful to at least orient you to what's coming, and that there's an order and a process to that. And again, there's we'll make the video available as well if you want to go back and listen to it, if you want other people who want to bring into the conversation. I think it's a lot. Don't get me wrong, it's a lot to go through, but I think seeing it in advance, at least the way I learned, is helpful. At least I'm not surprised by what I'm seeing. So that we got about 20 minutes left. I want to talk about what's coming up next, but I also want to field any questions or observations. Again, floor is open. All right, so we have numbed you into silence. So well, here's what's going to happen next then. And then if there's no question, that's fine. So Gillian is going to send everybody a login.
Daniel, there actually was a question in chat. So Michael Dharma, she asked, can you tell us about how long each module takes to complete?
Yes.
And then there's also the consent utility sounded very interesting. Is there a place we can view a demo?
So on the first question, we sort of, again, it all depends on your learning, your own learning style. We think that, correct me wrong, Gillian, if I got the numbers wrong, but I think it's by 20 to 30 minutes for the interoperability one, about an hour and 15 for module one, the big systems things, about the same amount of time. So probably about 3 hours altogether for just the screen time. That includes the assessment, depending if you want to do that. And so you get a score for the assessment. That's important there. The reading is now, as I said, we identify what's recommended reading, and then there's optional reading. You could spend a week, we could spend weeks reading the material that we've provided here. So you have to judge it for yourself. Some of the stuff you may be super familiar with already, other stuff may be new to you, and there's a bunch of resources there. So my guess is probably 10 hours is a good assumption to sort of allocate over, not all at once, but it's good to sort of parse it out. You're a fast reader, maybe it's quicker than that. If you want to go more reading, it's probably a little bit longer than that. So that's the assumptions on that. So it's substantive. It's not just kind of run through it. In terms of consent, I'm going to put a link to an article that was just published. There is no working model of that now. We are in the thick of it right now. Basically, we are developing and designing it. We're in conversations with Office of National Coordinator, also Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, others. So this is actually developing as we talk. It's real time, and we hope to be able to implement this with the Bronx, the Integrated Care for Kids in the Bronx and New Jersey, in a couple of counties in New Jersey. We're in conversations with a couple places in California and Colorado. So we're looking to actually build out the proof of concept over the next 3 to 12 months. So people are really interested in this. There's work groups that are meeting. There's a lot of work that's happening. We're writing a we're actually just finishing now a scan of consent that we'll put out there probably in hopefully about 2 to 3 weeks, maybe depending on within a month, which will kind of give an overview of the major consent efforts that are out there and thinking about what's happening. As I said, it's a point in time of what's happening on consent because nobody has really looked at this all together yet before. There is a body of knowledge that ONC has done historically, but again, it's all healthcare focused, And we're trying to expand that to say there's other worlds out there. So again, I'll put the link in here. And if anybody's interested in joining or reading it, that'd be super. Right. So Gillian will send a code for you to be able to go in. It should be really simple, just to go in. It's just your email and the code, right, Gillian? To get into it.
Yeah, first you have to just register to become a user on the site, and then I'll send you a code and you can enter that in the coupon field and it will deduct the course fee for you automatically. And then you'll be able to take the training. It tracks where you are. So if you have to close your window and walk away, it will remember where you left off and pick that back up again. And as Daniel said, you do have to complete the assessment in order to move on to the next part of the training. If you guys have any questions, you can email me. If you get stuck somewhere, you can email me and I can help you get through it.
So I just put the consent. There's a little short article that GovReports just put up there. It gives you a high-level overview, and we'll provide another link to the hub site. So here's the kind of here's the plan that we've got. So if you complete the introduction and the 3 pillars of interoperability, we meet next on October 19th. So the idea is to complete the exercises, do the work, do the workbooks, and see if you can get together with your team sometime before that, just to even to compare notes, right? And that 5th question, or if you have another question that you agree on that you want to talk about, I just want to get us into the habit, kind of exercise that activity, thinking about it together, because I think this will take root if multiple people in a community or in a county actually are thinking about it together, because it's super hard to do it individually. Anybody, you go to a conference, come back with a great idea, and then nobody else has heard it, so it's impossible to share it. Here is if you root it with a number of people, as we get into more of the complexity of it, it'll become a learning cohort for you. Sure, not the first time you've done that. So the timing here, and we'll send this out again in a follow-up note just to put on everyone's calendar. Next meeting is October 19th. At that time, we'll review basically the intro and the pillars of interoperability. The first 2 modules, talk about those. You can take all 3 of them if you want, but we're gonna focus on the October 19th on those first 2 to go into more detail and discussion. The next meeting in November, we'll look at this last section, the putting interoperability to work. This is the stuff I just showed you around the exceptional models, the drivers, the baseline assessment, those kinds of things, because that's really a pretty pragmatic kind of thing. And we'll also, as I said, that time maybe we'll do the organizational baseline, or if there's something more pressing for you guys that you want to look at collectively, that's fine as well. You may have you may know that stuff already. You may want to focus another activity on that. We have, with our agreement with Kresge, to be able to provide some consultation to each county. So we'll set up time if you're interested in that to kind of dive into the pieces that we might be able to add value to, or might be able to focus, resources or provide some insight into that. And then we'll get together on the November 4th meeting and sort of pull that learning together and figure out what happens next. I will say that we actually have just recently published our second module, or our second course. That course is on privacy and consent. So we just finished, there's a 2-part module. We just finished the first one, which is privacy and consent. And we can make that available if you want to get into it. We're not planning on going over that here, but I think I'm pretty sure there'll be interest in that. And we can talk about how to make that available to folks as well, because it goes along with consent and it goes along with all this other stuff. around data interoperability. So here's, and I will send this out to you as well. This is the webinar 2 and 3, kind of just articulating the pieces we're going to go over. And then in the presentation, there's a couple of resources here. There's this thing called the National Interoperability Collaborative. Let me just show this to you for anybody who got excited about sort of joining this work. Yeah, I think I can get to it here. Yeah. Can you see the, yeah.
You have
can
to
see the
reshare your screen, I think, Daniel.
What's that? Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So this is, again, some of the work that came out of the support from Kresge is actually building this collaboration hub. And we've just sort of trimmed this down. It had tons of stuff. It had a bunch of groups on it. And this is a place where we actually have our work groups meeting. So in here, there's some work around interoperability, and there's also this consent group here, and you could just go into it. Here's the members of the group, an overview of it. There's some videos around aspects of it that would be relevant to folks. It's a resource that's free and available to folks. And then these are all work groups. So there's a consent work group, there's fire apps, there's all it's kind of wonky stuff here around different groups kind of diving into the details of it. As I said, for those folks who want to dive into it, and when we were talking with Joel and company, there are a lot of resources that you may want to avail yourself towards that are here, and where you guys are at in terms of your journey may be of value to you as you go forward. So I guess I would add one more thing, which is we can actually create separate groups for you on the hub. So Solano can have your own group, Alameda can have your own group, and you can actually do work together there if that's helpful. It's a very quick setup, but as opposed to emailing back and forth, or doing SharePoint stuff, if it's helpful, we can set that up, and you can use it not only during the course but ongoing to bring. You can post documents, you can have conversations. Not Slack, but it's okay in terms of the chat function. And so that's a resource that we can make available. I didn't want to get into that today at this point, but just know that it's out there.
That'd be great.
Great. Well, just we can talk about making that happen. And we customize. You can just let people in you want, or open it up to anybody you want as well. And it has been really effective. For sure.
Danielle, so the groups are going to be your own county group, not a mixture of who's here?
Yeah, I think that I think it would be in terms of the intersession work, the work between the sessions, it should be my sense is it should be your own county. If you're looking at how this work would apply to you, that doesn't mean we can't look at doing something different than that, is actually bringing people together and cross-system learning as well. The idea was to sort of focus in on the training pieces, so we get that nailed down. But I think cross-system learning is hugely relevant and hugely valuable. So that's on the table. If people are interested in that, we can talk about what that would look like. We'd love talking about this. I'd love talking about this stuff, and there's a bunch of folks who love it. And so we could, certainly, as we get into this, talk more about that and see if that's useful to you. And again, we have these Wednesday afternoon Unify calls. If somebody wants to dive into the technical pieces of this, particularly on consent, we can send you that link, and it's a boisterous, fun, technical kind of conversation all the time around these things. So I know. Okay, great. So you know what? If you just put in the chat, if you're interested in this, and maybe what we can do, Gillian, is when we send out a note recap, we can just actually put that in there and ask people if they're thinking about that. We can figure out how to coordinate.
Yeah, I did get a couple comments that people really liked the cross-county discussion we had. So I think if there's more way to, that we could integrate that in our future meetings, that would be great. It sounds like you guys are enjoying learning from one another.
Yeah. Another way to do that is we can actually add time on to these meetings. Pretty used to doing longer. This kind of work is done good in a workshop setting. I can say when we did the work in Connecticut, we would spend all day on one of these topics, right? Or half a day. We carve out the morning or the afternoon in the room together. There, obviously, we're all living in Zoom world here. It's okay, but it's not the whole Monty, so to speak. So if you're willing to do that, that might be an easy way to sort of, without scheduling a whole other meeting, just say, you know, let's start an hour, or let's continue an hour longer, dive into that. Or we can schedule something else. I'm not quite sure what the best way to go about that, but we certainly think about that. And nothing better than we would love to do is to sort of facilitate that cross agency, because you guys have so much knowledge and I'm sure that you'd love to hear from each other and share that, and wherever we can add some value or point to directions or resources, that would be great. So happy to do that. Other thoughts? Great. Okay, so what we'll do, Gillian, we'll send out a copy of the PowerPoint as everybody has it, reference back to it, kind of a letter. You'll get the code to dial into it. As again, you can paste it or you can do it all together. You can keep going back to it as you like. The workbook itself will stay there. So if you shut, you know, if you close out, your material will be there. Some people like to print that out just for notes for yourself, as I said. And then we'll just sort of move, you know, agilely move along. Feel free to contact me or Gillian directly. This is exciting. I'm so glad. I'm so delighted to be able to share this stuff. Thanks, Joel, for inviting us to do this with this group of folks.
Absolutely.
So Cheryl, what I'll do is here's I'm going to put my email in here directly, and what I can do is I'll just send you, or anybody who's interested, I'll just send you the meeting invite, and you just join the meeting, and that's fine. And we can send you some background materials. We've got several sort of documents that kind of go along with the work as it's happening here. Losing my train of thought here a little bit, but just email me directly if you want an invite to that Wednesday meeting. And they're amazing, and we record them all as well. So the recording is available. So like yesterday, we had a meeting on something called patient protection PP2PI, which is how do you tag data elements within records so that you can know what is not shareable or what is shareable on a record. So you can, as opposed to sharing everything, which is what you kind of have to do now, you can segment it. So you can say, not this information, but yes, that information. So that's a big initiative that's happening again out of the Office National Coordinator. So PP2PI is really leading the charge in that area. Again, from the healthcare side, but we're looking at how do you bring that same kind of tagging to this space as well, if that's a sort of a granular way of dealing with consent. So that was just yesterday, and we spent 2 hours talking about that. Again, all that stuff is available. And on the hub, if you get to the hub, so we should just put the link to the hub in here as well, just for folks to grab it. Let me put this up here. It may ask you just to sign up here. Let me just put this into the, so this will get you to the hub itself, and you hunt around there, and you'll find all sorts of kinds of materials that are relevant to these topics.
I'll include that link in the email too that we send
Okay.
when you register for ITCC, so you have it.
Okay, let me make sure. Rishon, you're interested, Cheryl? Okay, Cheryl Esters. Okay. Thank you so much for your attention, participation, and I really look forward to talking to you. Feel free to email us, if you got questions or thoughts or comments, and we'll catch up with you real soon.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Take care.